Presentation of Science Trek on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Volcanoes are openings in the Earth's crust. Magma pushes up to the surface and lava flows out. Volcanoes have changed our world, and we're here to answer your questions about volcanoes. Stay tuned. Science Trek is next. Hi, I'm Joan Cartan Hansen, and welcome to Science Trek, and welcome to Craters of the Moon National Monument. As recently as 2,000 years ago, this place was alive with active volcanoes. These lava fields are reminders of the power of volcanoes to shape our environment. Later in the show, we'll join our scientists at Boise State University to answer your questions. But first, let's learn a little bit more about volcanoes. The Earth is made up of many layers. The top layer is called the crust. Below the crust is the mantle, a region of more fluid rock. The Earth's crust is broken into pieces called tectonic plates. These plates are floating on top of the mantle, and those plates are constantly moving at about the same speed as a human fingernail grows. A volcano is a vent or an opening in the Earth's crust. Those openings are most often located at places where the tectonic plates bump together or pull apart. Sometimes volcanoes are found in the middle of a tectonic plate. That's often called a hotspot. Yellowstone National Park is located over a hotspot. A volcano forms when magma makes its way toward the surface. And what causes magma to rise? Well, gas comes out of the magma and helps make it buoyant. You can see gas coming out of a liquid when you shake a bottle of soda. Turn the bottle upside down and gas bubbles rise slowly. Shake the bottle.
Really?
Yeah, shake the bottle and open the top. The pressure of the gas bubbles can make an explosive eruption.
I can see gas can cause magma to rise and explode.
True. Now sometimes the magma never makes it to the surface through a volcano. It can solidify in the crust, like the central part of Idaho. That's called a batholith. Other times, the magma breaks through the crust and flows out. When magma reaches the surface, it's called lava. Scientists change the name so they know if they're talking about the molten rock on the inside or the molten rock flowing outside. A volcano forms when the flowing lava and the ash cool and harden and start to build upon itself. Volcanoes can form a mountain or an island. Volcanoes created the islands that make up the state of Hawaii. There are three common kinds of lava. Pahoehoe lava is thin and has a smooth surface. When it cools, it forms rounded lobes and can look like twisted rope. Lava is thicker and stickier. It has a rough, jagged surface when it cools. And blocky lava is so thick, it doesn't travel far. It forms blocks of different sizes when it cools. And there are different kinds of volcanoes. There are shield volcanoes. They have domed shape and gradual slopes because the lava flows down rather than building up. Cinder cones, like these found at Craters of the Moon National Monument in Idaho, have steeper sides. They form when globs of lava are thrown into the air by an eruption. When you make a paper volcano at home, you're probably making a cinder cone. Go ahead, show the eruption.
Really? Wait. That was a powerful eruption.
Some eruptions are so powerful they can destroy the volcano. A caldera is a volcano that lost its upper slopes when it collapsed on itself during an eruption, leaving a massive bowl-like shape. Most of Yellowstone National Park is in a huge caldera. And then there are lava domes. Lava domes are formed from lava so thick that it can only ooze out and build up within the crater. They can be found inside another type of volcano, a stratovolcano or a composite volcano. Stratovolcanoes are made up of lava and rock fragments and can often be seen as impressive snow-capped peaks. They don't generally erupt, but when they do, they can explode. In 1980, Mount St. Helens in Washington state erupted, sending 540 tons of ash over 22,000 square miles. The explosion created a current of hot ash and gas that traveled across the landscape and killed 57 people and knocked down enough trees to make 300,000 homes. The ash thrown out by the eruption was so heavy in some places, it blotted out the sun. Scientists now monitor Mount St. Helens to learn how volcanoes work and what's happened since the 1980 eruption. Scientists who study volcanoes are called volcanologists. They can travel all over the world to study exploding volcanoes, and in any one year, as many as 60 volcanoes around the world can be active. These scientists know volcanoes can be deadly. They hope by studying them and learning more about them, they can someday predict when an eruption might occur and save lives. And joining me now to answer your questions about volcanoes are Jeff Johnson, Associate Professor of Geosciences at Boise State University, and Brittany Brand, Assistant Professor, also in the Department of Geosciences at Boise State University. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us on your show.
Okay, let's go to your questions.
Hi, my name is Natalie. I go to Coal Valley Christian School, and my question is, why do volcanoes erupt?
Magma is a liquid. It's stored within the crust, and because it's a liquid, it's less dense than the surrounding rock. So it's going to rise buoyantly through the crust towards the surface. When it gets to the surface, the pressures inside that intrusion of magma get so high that they finally exceed the ability of the rock to hold it in. It would be kind of like filling up a water balloon too full. Eventually it's going to pop and open. So essentially volcanoes erupt when the lava, or the magma in this case, gets so close to the surface that it can punch out.
Hi, my name is Ashlyn, and I go to Longfellow Elementary, and my question is, how many active volcanoes are there in the world?
Well, active volcanism is defined as a volcano that's erupted in the last 10,000 years. This means, according to that standard, there are 1,500 active volcanoes, and about 500 of those have erupted during historic times. Today, for instance, there are about 20 volcanoes worldwide that are in eruption.
My name is Alex. I go to Idaho Elementary, and my question is, what makes lava rise?
Magma is what we call molten rock when it's inside the ground. Lava is what we call it when it erupts onto the ground. So when magma is rising up, the reason magma rises is because it's less dense. A liquid is less dense than the surrounding rock. So it's going to rise like a hot air balloon through the crust until it makes its way to the surface to erupt.
Hi, my name is Emma. I go to Lewis and Clark Elementary. My question is, what is the science of a volcano when it's about to erupt?
Volcanologists are very interested in understanding and forecasting volcanic eruptions. And they look at four principal things to understand whether a volcano is getting ready to erupt. They'll look at the earthquake activity underneath the ground. They'll look at the deformation of the volcano. Is the volcano growing in size or not? They'll also look at the gases coming out of a volcano and also the temperature of a volcano crater and fumarolic features. So those four things together can give us a sense of whether a volcano is moving towards eruption.
Hi, my name is Nathan. I go to River Valley Elementary School. My question is, how far do volcanoes shoot lava?
Well, usually if lava is coming out of a volcano, it doesn't shoot up into the sky. It flows across the ground. When lava becomes explosive, or when a magma becomes explosive, it's because it has gas in it. And in that case, the gases expand and rip the lava apart. That shoots up into the air, and it can go anywhere from just a couple 100 feet all the way up to 20-25 miles into the atmosphere.
So Brittany, to put that into perspective, some volcano that erupts up to 30 miles into the atmosphere is shooting material up 5 times as high as a commuter airplane flies.
Hi, my name is Ryan, and I'd like to know, how hot is liquid magma?
Liquid magma is really hot. In order to melt rock and create magma or lava, you need to have temperatures of at least 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and some lavas are as hot as 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. If a lava is at least maybe 800 degrees Fahrenheit, you can detect that it's glowing a little bit.
Hi, my name is Jeff and I go to Cynthia Man Elementary School. My question is, how many times can a volcano erupt?
A volcano can erupt as long as it has a supply of magma from depth. So really, innumerable times.
Volcanoes can erupt continuously, volcanoes can erupt continuously for years, or volcanoes can erupt over the course of a few days and then stop for many hundreds of years. It really depends upon the character of a specific volcano.
Hi, my name is Nick. I go to Answer Charter School. My question is, how many different kinds of lava are there?
There are more types of lava on Earth than there are flavors of ice cream. You can have lava that's very thick and sticky and it doesn't flow very easily. It might just pile up inside of a volcanic crater. Or you can have lava that's really fluid and flows quite far from the volcano. Two styles of lava that you might be familiar with are Pohoihoi and A'a, which are really common in Hawaii. These lavas have the same composition, but one of them, Pohoihoi, moves very slowly across the ground and forms a smooth surface, whereas A'a is usually moving faster and tumbles around and forms a really rough surface.
Hi, my name's Adriana, and my question is, how do people know when a volcano is extinct?
This is a really important and good question. How do we know when a volcano will never erupt again, which is what extinct means? And the answer to that question is we can't absolutely be certain. Generally, when a volcano hasn't erupted for 10,000 years, we declare that volcano to be dead. But in many cases, we don't know that the volcano hasn't erupted for 10,000 years. Or in other cases, a volcano that's been quiet for 10,000 years may awaken. And there have been plenty of examples worldwide of volcanoes that were thought of as extinct that have erupted.
The tallest volcano in the solar system isn't on Earth, it's on Mars. Olympus Mons is 16 miles high and 374 miles in diameter. It's so big, it would completely cover the state of Arizona.
Hi, my name is DeMarcus, and I go to Jefferson Elementary, and my question is, how do magma chambers work?
This is a really good question, and this is a question that a lot of researchers around the world are still trying to understand. How do magma chambers form? How do they grow? What controls when they erupt or when they don't erupt? One thing that most people don't know is that 90% of magma never erupts. It stays in the ground and it cools very slowly over time until it completely solidifies. So to answer the question of how do magma chambers work, well, we're still trying to answer that one. But essentially, magma forms in the mantle is melted, it migrates through the crust, and it accumulates in layers or pods within the crust until eventually maybe some of it makes its way to the surface, whereas most of it actually stays down in these chambers and will cool over time.
Hi, my name is Kai. I go to North Junior High, and my question is, could volcanoes be a renewable thermal energy source?
Volcanic areas are one of the premier examples of renewable energy resources. A common misconception is that the geothermal energy that comes from volcanic areas taps into the actual magma, and this is not true, but we tap into the hot ground surrounding the volcanic area. One country that does an exceptionally good job with harvesting geothermal energy from volcanoes is Iceland.
Hi, my name is Avery. I go to Lewis and Clark Elementary. My question is about volcanoes. What is the world's largest volcano?
The Earth's largest volcano is Mauna Loa, which is in Hawaii. This volcano is more than 15,000 feet high, and if I told you it was the tallest mountain in the world, you probably wouldn't believe me. But in fact, it is higher than Mount Everest because Mauna Loa doesn't start from the sea and up. It actually grew from the bottom of the ocean all the way up to where it is now, which means that the total height of that volcano is more than 30,000 feet.
Hi, my name is Brayden, and my question is, which volcano had the longest eruption, and where did it happen?
The longest continuously erupting volcano on Earth is currently Kilauea Volcano in Hawaii. This volcano has been erupting continuously since 1983 and has been effusing or emitting lava flows ever since then.
Hi, my name is Ethan. I go to A.J. Winters Elementary. My question is, how much magma is in the Earth?
How much magma is under the Earth? Well, so a common misconception is that the inside of the Earth is magma, that the mantle is molten. But in fact, the mantle, the inside of the Earth, is primarily solid. So there are no permanent bodies of magma in the Earth. The mantle has to melt for bodies of magma to be generated and to intrude into the crust. That usually happens either at tectonic boundaries, like subduction zones or divergent boundaries, or at hotspot, associated with hotspot volcanism. How much magma is currently floating around down there and making its way to the crust? It's really a hard question to answer. I don't think anybody really knows.
Hi, my name is Ian. I go to Washington Elementary. My question is, how long does it take for lava to harden on the ground?
Amazingly enough, when lava erupts and starts to flow on the surface and then stops moving, it solidifies almost immediately, at least on the surface, which is why a moving lava flow that stops moving is something that you can walk on almost immediately. However, inside that lava flow, the heat retains its heat for a long, long time. And one spectacular example is a lava flow that entered into a crater in Hawaii from a volcanic vent that filled this crater up to a height of about 150 feet. Well, it took several decades, about 30 years, for that lava pond to freeze to solid rock.
Hi, my name is Michael. I go to St. Main Elementary School. My question is, how do volcanoes get their shape?
This is a good question. And again, it comes back to what flavor of lava is erupting. Volcanoes that form very tall, steep peaks, like Mount St. Helens or Mount Rainier, these volcanoes usually erupt very thick, sticky lava. And when you get this thick, sticky lava, it just can't flow very well. It won't flow away from the volcano. So instead, these volcanoes tend to grow higher and higher when they erupt. In contrast, the volcanoes in Hawaii have very fluid lavas. And in this case, the lava can flow very far away from the volcano. So in this case, volcanoes will grow out rather than up. So you can kind of just get a sense of what kind of magma is coming out of volcanoes simply by their shape. The flat ones, the shield volcanoes, typically erupt fluid lavas, and the tall, steep ones typically erupt thick, sticky lavas.
Earthquakes also helped reshape the Earth's surface, so let's learn a little bit more about earthquakes. The Earth is made up of three main layers. The center, or core, which is very hot. Around the core lies the mantle, a thick layer of mostly rock and some liquid. And floating on top of the mantle is the Earth's thin outer layer called the crust. The crust is made up of separate slabs called tectonic plates. The solid rock of the crust is under constant pressure from the movement of the plates. As a result, giant cracks or fault lines are created. When plates try to slide past each other along a fault line, sometimes they get stuck. The pressure builds up until the plates suddenly break apart, causing a powerful ground movement we call an earthquake.
You can see why an earthquake can cause a lot of damage. Put two wood blocks together and cover them with a layer of sand. Put a few buildings and animals on top, and then move one of the blocks. And that's what an earthquake looks like.
The spot on the Earth's surface reached by the first wave is called the epicenter. From the epicenter, seismic waves or shock waves spread outward. Scientists measure earthquakes with a special tool called a seismograph. The seismograph's pen records shock waves by drawing lines on a piece of paper. When a wave is closer or stronger, the line is longer. When the wave is farther away or weaker, the line is shorter. Another thing scientists look for is the intensity and magnitude of an earthquake. The intensity is the damage that people can see and feel. The magnitude is how strong the surface of the Earth shakes.
Scientists use a special scale called a Richter scale to measure the intensity and magnitude of an earthquake. The higher the number, the more severe the earthquake. Say this marble represents a magnitude 1 earthquake, then a golf ball would be a 3, a baseball would be a 4, and a soccer ball would be a 5. The largest earthquake in the world so far happened in Chile in February of 2010. That quake measured 9.5 on the Richter scale. So if it were a ball, it would be about this size.
One of the most famous earthquakes in U.S. history was the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco. That earthquake leveled 500 city blocks, killed 3,000 people, and left 225,000 people homeless. One of the largest earthquakes in Idaho history was the 1983 quake near the town of Challis. 2 children died when a storefront collapsed on top of them. And in that quake, Mount Bora, Idaho's highest peak, rose about a foot and then fell back into place. Earthquakes just don't happen on land. They can happen in the ocean, too, and can be just as destructive. The shifting of the ocean floor can cause a giant wave called a tsunami. Because a tsunami contains so much energy, it can race across the ocean for thousands of miles at speeds of more than 500 miles per hour. And when it reaches land, the height of the wave can be over 100 feet tall. Scientists have no way of predicting earthquakes, so it's a good idea to have a disaster kit at home. You should have a fire extinguisher, a first aid kit, and enough water so everyone in your family can have enough to drink for 3 days. You should have an emergency plan so everyone knows where to meet after an earthquake. And make sure you or your parents have a person out of town you can contact so they can let everybody else know you're okay. During an earthquake, if you're inside, get under a strong table and stay away from windows. And if you're outside, stay away from buildings, trees, and power lines. Scientists are studying earthquakes in hopes of someday learning how to predict when they will happen. That could save lots of lives. But for now, we don't know when the next earthquake will strike. The best thing you can do is find out what an earthquake is, and then be prepared.
Hi, my name is Gabe, and I go to Cynthia Mann Elementary School. And my question is there enough smoke if a volcano erupted? Would there be enough to kill people?
Volcanoes don't produce smoke. When we see a column rising up from a volcano, we like to call that gas or ash or a plume. Smoke happens when something is burning. So a volcano can only produce smoke when a lava flow maybe encounters vegetation and starts burning that vegetation.
Hi, my name is Tyler. I go to Galileo, and my question is, how do volcanoes rise under the water?
Sometimes volcanoes erupt underwater. This happens a lot off the coast of New Zealand or Japan, or even sometimes in Hawaii. When a volcano will actually breach the surface, it means that the volcano has erupted enough that it's formed a pile of volcanic material that can breach the surface and become an island. But it has to grow. It doesn't kind of push the crust up. It actually has to erupt and build until it can build up into an island. When the growing volcano is below the ocean, we usually call it a seamount. When it arrives to the surface and breaches, we can call it a volcanic island.
My name is Ryder. I go to AJ Winters Elementary, and I want to know what kind of gases come out of volcanoes.
Volcanic gases are super important because they drive explosive volcanic eruptions. And magmas have gases entrained or dissolved in the magma prior to eruption. If you were to uncork a bottle of magma, the 3 primary gases you would find would be water, carbon dioxide, and sulfur dioxide, and then a bunch of other trace gases which are much smaller in total amount.
The most important volcanic gas is actually usually just water vapor. More than 90% of the gases that come out of explosive eruptions is water vapor.
Hi, my name is Madison, and I go to Cynthia Mann Elementary School. And my question is, how far can lava travel from the volcano?
It depends on the type of lava. So if you have a very thick and sticky lava, it can't flow very far. For example, a lot of people are familiar with the famous eruption, explosive eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980. Well, after the explosive phase of the eruption, the volcano continued to erupt for the next 6 years, but it was just lava coming out. There was no more gas to cause an explosion. And the lava was so thick and sticky that it just didn't go anywhere, it just piled up inside of the crater. On the other end of the spectrum, you can have lavas that are very fluid and can flow across the surface quite quickly. And in these cases, like in Hawaii, you can have lavas that extend tens of miles. Sometimes you'll even have a lava channel that crusts over and forms a lava tube. That lava can travel even further because lava is a great insulator, cooled lava crust. And so that can travel up to 30, 40, 50 miles away from the volcano.
In extreme cases where we have volcanoes known as flood basalts, we can have lava flowing in lava tubes for up to hundreds of miles. And a great example of these extensive lava fields is in eastern Washington in the Columbia River flood basalt region.
Hi, my name is Ayla. I go to Snake River Montessori School, and my question is, can magma come out of the earth in any other spot than a hot spot or where the plates meet?
Other than those areas, there shouldn't be any lava erupting from the surface because there needs to be a way to generate the magma, to melt the magma, and that really takes subduction zones, divergent boundaries, or a hot spot.
Hi, my name is Valerie. I go to Chalice Elementary School. My question is there a volcano in Idaho?
Yes, we have volcanoes in Idaho. The most famous volcano in Idaho is Yellowstone. Yellowstone is mostly in Wyoming, but extends a tiny bit into Idaho. Another famous volcano in Idaho is Craters of the Moon National Monument, which is actually a series of volcanoes. Craters of the Moon most recently erupted around 2,000 years ago. So we don't exactly lose sleep worrying about the next volcanic eruption in Idaho, but there are active volcanoes in the state.
I'm sorry we've run out of time. My thanks to Jeff and Brittany for answering questions today.
Thanks for having us. That was great fun.
That was a lot of fun. Thank you very much. Great questions, kids.
My thanks to the folks at Boise State University and the folks here at Craters of the Moon National Monument for hosting us. You can learn more about volcanoes and lots of other scientific topics on the Science Trek website. And we'll answer more questions about volcanoes on Science Trek the Web Show. And if you want to submit a question for Science Trek, it's easy, and you and your class can win prizes. You can send it as an email or as a video question, recorded on your webcam or cell phone. And if you're an educator, we'll even lend you a camera. Our last prize winner was Adrian at Cynthia Mann Elementary in Boise. So to find out all about volcanoes, how to send in your questions, and how to win, go to the Science Trek website. And each week, check out my blog for the latest science news for kids. You'll find it all at idahoptv.org/Science Trek. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Science Trek.
Presentation of Science Trek on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
If you want to learn more about this topic or watch our videos, check out the Science Trek website at idahoptv.org/Science Trek.